Hello, this is Professor Andrew Arroyo, and I wanted to offer you this presentation today about writing your lit review, which is known as the research within your research. We're going to cover why lit reviews are important. We'll cover what sources to include, how to find those sources, and then also a little bit on how to organize your lit review. So let's begin. First, let's look at why we conduct lit reviews. It sounds funny, but it really is the research within your research. Doctoral dissertations contain a chapter which is known as Chapter 2, and that is the lit review. There are whole journals that are dedicated to publishing just lit reviews, and all empirical studies have to have lit reviews as part of them. A lit review, again, in case you don't know, is short for review of the literature, but who wants to say review of the literature all the time? So we just say lit review. But it really is the research within the research. It's a whole separate, it needs to be treated as a whole separate study within the study. And basically, if I can just give you a definition of a lit review, it's the story of the knowledge. It's telling us what we already know. And so this leads us to the first purpose of a lit review, which is by telling us what we already know, we discover what we don't know. And it's that area called the gap in the literature, that area that we don't know that we want to focus on. So we know some things based on certain empirical studies, and then we know other things based on certain empirical studies, and the review of the literature talks about all of that stuff that we know that other researchers have discovered already. And then in doing that, the lit review reveals areas, gaps in the literature where we don't know. And that's why, if I can refer you back to your statement of the problem, that's why I give you that phraseology saying the purpose of, the research problem motivating this study is the lack of knowledge. Because that's what you want to do. You want to find an area where we lack knowledge. You want to find a gap in the literature. Well, you can't really truly know that you're identifying a lack of knowledge or a gap in the literature unless you've conducted a lit review. So that's number one. Another purpose is an issue of time. Who wants to spend all their time conducting a major empirical study only to discover that a ton of people have already covered that particular area? No, I have a limited amount of time to spend in my life, and I want to make sure that as a researcher I'm identifying true problem areas, true gaps in the literature, to use my time most effectively in filling those gaps. And then this leads to the third and final purpose of a lit review, and that is to establish your credibility and your authority. So if you just go out and you produce this study but you don't contextualize it within the larger knowledge base by telling us, okay, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here's how my study is filling this gap in the literature, then I'm going to doubt your credibility. I'm going to doubt your authority. As a reviewer for scholarly journals, when I have a new study come across my desk that I have to review for quality to judge whether it should make it into the journal or not, I look at people's lit reviews to make sure that they have the right sources, to make sure that they've covered the topic adequately, and to make sure that they've established authority by saying, okay, and here's an area that we need to fill, and here's how I'm going to fill it. And then other researchers do the same thing with my studies when I submit them to journals. So these are the three main purposes of a lit review. Now make no mistake about it, this is really, really tough work. And you need to understand that going in. There are a lot of jokes about lit reviews because people they get into it and they get freaked out, and sometimes for good reason, because it really is difficult. And if you don't understand this going in, then you can really get a sense that you're all alone in this, and it's very easy to give up then. But you need to understand that you're just like everybody else. And this thing is not going to write itself. You're going to have to put in the work, and it's the same work that everybody else puts in. Really, whether or not you succeed at a lit review comes down to your understanding of success. If you think that success is just getting from point A to point B in a straight line without any struggle, well, you're going to have a really hard time. But if you understand as a life principle that success is not a straight line, but it's a bunch of curves, it's a bunch of detours, sometimes it means going backwards. Sometimes success involves setbacks, it involves failure. But the point is that you keep going and eventually you will reach your destination. But you must embrace the struggle. In those moments when you're in front of your computer, when you're at the library, when you're thinking about this thing and you want to give up, you wonder, are you sliding back too much? Sometimes you might have to scrap a whole set of pages that you've written, or sometimes you might go days of searching without finding an article that you're looking for. You know, the point is, are you going to be able to embrace that struggle, or are you going to give up? If you don't give up, I promise you that out of this desert will emerge something beautiful, something that you can be proud of. And so I want you to keep that image in your mind, just knowing confidently that you will produce something great if you're just willing to work at it. So now, what should go into a lit review? There's one thing that should never be in a lit review, and I'm not even going to say the name of this source. This is the source that shall not be named, but you understand what I'm saying. Never, ever, 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 ever should this source be in a lit review. Other sources that don't go into lit reviews are newspaper articles, news stories from websites like CNN or Time. Regular websites don't belong in lit reviews. Lit reviews are very specifically scholarly sources, academic journals, primary source materials, and academic books. Understand that there's a difference between a popular press book that's written for public consumption and an academic book that's written for scholars, that has sources, that contributes to new knowledge. And that's really what you want. The litmus test is, does this source contribute in some way to new knowledge in an original way? Is it important for understanding the story of the knowledge? Or is it just talking about the knowledge? Or is it just repackaging it for public consumption? If it is, then you don't want those sources. You want only the primary source or academic journals or academic books in your lit review. Now, where do you find these? I'll tell you what I like to do. I start out with Google Scholar. Now, this is not google.com. This is very specifically scholar.google.com. No www first. You go here and you begin your search, and you start just playing around with key terms. If you're not familiar with the area that you're researching, this is going to be an area of struggle at first while you're figuring out what terms return the best results. But again, you just keep going, keep entering terms, and eventually you'll figure it out, and your studies will get your searches will get streamlined, and you'll start finding good results. You can also go directly to databases. This is an example of a database that's on the internet. There are a lot of these databases that you can go directly to and conduct the same types of searches as you can at scholar.google.com. Another source, surprise, surprise, is the Norfolk State University Library. You go to library.nsu.edu. And this source will take you to a page, and you'll see the word search on that page. It's a small word in the toolbar. When you type on search, when you click on search, you will see options to search for journals, or you can search for databases. And what you can do is you can either go directly there and conduct an original search, or you can take a citation, a reference that you found in Google Scholar, and you can search for the full text article through the journals. And a lot of times we will have the full text article there. You must understand, you cannot take shortcuts in lit review searches. It's not enough to have an abstract. You have to download and read the full article. So you must get the full article. If you cannot find the full article, either through Google Scholar, or through our available databases or journal holdings, then what you do is you go to ILL, which is Interlibrary Loan. Okay? Now, Interlibrary Loan is a special feature that we have at our library. You create a new account for it. It's accessible through the library website. You just go to the Services tab, and you can enter in the information for any book or any article, and our Interlibrary Loan librarian will put out to libraries nationwide for that item. There are times that I will get an article returned to me the very day that I ask for it. Sometimes it's the next day, sometimes it's a few days, but most of the time it's literally the next day. And it's emailed directly to me, or it's put into my Interlibrary Loan account, and then I just download it in PDF form. It's so convenient. So if we don't have the article here at Norfolk State, what you need to understand is that we have resources to get it for you. So there's no excuse that you can't find an article. In all my years of being a researcher, there have been maybe 1 or 2 times tops that an article has been untraceable. All the other times, I've been able to get exactly what I need. So there's no excuse, okay? Now, what kinds of articles should you include in your study? Well, you need to use your judgment in selecting studies that represent the gradual cumulative building of the knowledge base. Now, how do you know what's representative? Well, that requires you doing a lot of legwork to understand what you should include. Very few times will you conduct a lit review that includes everything that's been done on your topic. You're going to be selective about it. One thing that you should include is seminal studies, which is a groundbreaking study. If you can find it, you want to find the very first study that has been that was ever conducted on your area, and you would include that. Now, that might be new if you have a new area of research, or it might be very, very old, decades old. Or in rare cases, you might be the very first, in which case you are going to produce the seminal study. I've been privileged to contribute a couple of seminal studies and to the area where I'm a researcher, and it's a great feeling. It's very rewarding. And so in my case, I could not include seminal studies, but what I did was I included studies that related to the topic, and then I showed how there was a specific niche area that really needed the particular study that I was producing, that represented not just a small gap in the literature, but literally a whole new area of research. So, for example, in the area of HBCUs, no one had ever produced a theory on the work that HBCUs do for student success. In fact, nobody had ever produced any theory related to HBCUs before. I was the first one to produce that theory, and it's been published in a scholarly journal, and so now anybody who wants to do theoretical work on HBCUs will have to cite my article. So, but that's about seminal studies. Now, also you need to include some recent studies that are 0 to about 5 years old, okay? You don't just want to include old studies if newer stuff has been done. And then also you want to include whatever you deem important. that took place between some of the newer studies and the older seminal study. So let's say that your seminal study was in 1950, so you want to have that study, and then you want to have some of the newer studies, and then also a relevant sample of studies in the mix to tell us what happened in the meantime. Now, let me just give you an illustration. Here we have the periodic table. Now, you know we did not just come up with this out of thin air. But when you look at these very elements and the organization of the table, you know that there's a story behind this. So if you were to tell the story of the knowledge of the periodic table, it's just like what you're doing with a lit review. You would talk about what various researchers did at various points in time that eventually resulted piece by piece in this periodic table. That's what you're doing. You would go back to the beginning when people thought that the four elements were earth, wind, water, and fire. You would talk about Thales, the Greek philosopher, scientist, engineer who produced this idea of the four elements. And then you would take us through the centuries of the progress of science and knowledge to the current day where we have this periodic table. Again, it's the story of the development of the knowledge. That's what you're doing with your lit review, except in relation to your topic and your particular research problem. Now, there are a number of ways to write the lit review. The thing that I like about lit reviews is that you could have two people write a lit review on the same topic, but they're not going to come out alike because A, you've got your different writing styles, and then B, you have your different judgment. However, and your different organization. However, they would contain a lot of the same studies. They would contain a lot of the same seminal studies, a lot of the same intermediate studies, and then some of the same recent studies. This is how I, as a researcher, can judge articles when they come across my desk if they're in the area that I know well, that an area of my expertise, because I know the seminal studies that I should see there. I know some of the recent studies. I know some of the better intermediate studies that I should see. But nonetheless, no two lit reviews are going to be written exactly alike. There are a lot of different ways to organize these lit reviews. Most popular are chronologically or thematically. Chronological just means that you go by date. This happened this date, this happened this date. My favorite is thematically by subtopics, and the reason I like this one, oh look, I forgot a period after subtopics, so that's my typo. But you organize by subtopics, and the reason I like this is because oftentimes a single study will talk about a number of different things. There will be a number of different findings, and so that if you're just going chronologically, you're not really going to capture the fullness of the impact of that study. You're really not going to be weaving the studies together properly. But I like to talk thematically, and one particular study might be mentioned multiple times in my lit review because it has findings under category A and findings under category B. And you really need to see your lit review as a chef sees a dish, where it's not so much the individual ingredients, which is what a chronological lit review would do, but it's really more the sum of the ingredients. It's how you weave the ingredients together to produce that final dish with the rich, deep flavors. That's what you're going for in a thematic lit review, and that's what I want you to try to achieve. This takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of revising. There are times I'll write a lit review and then I'll scrap the whole thing because I'll realize that it feels too artificial. What you need to do is you need to do a lot of research about how to write lit reviews and find a way that you feel most comfortable with. But I do want to say one thing. Do not merely summarize. Don't just tell me what these various researchers found, but tell me why they're significant, and tell me, really what they found, and and how it all fits together in the building of the knowledge base. Because again, you're ultimately identifying gaps and showing why your study is so important. So let's close with this final thought. Don't sink your own ship. It's going to be really tempting to use the cut and paste feature, but this feature is the enemy, okay? You need to research what the APA manual says. You need to go back to what we've already covered in APA and recognize that if you plagiarize, then you will fail this assignment, and that could be grounds for being and failing in the course. I'm very serious about this. I've been plagiarized, and it's an ugly, ugly act of theft, and I don't want you to do it. So even though that's the easy road, don't take it. Don't be tempted. I want to see your work. And on that note, I want to conclude in a positive way by saying I really look forward to seeing your work. Is your work going to be the next great lit review? No. I'm just asking you to do a mini lit review, not involving many studies at all. But this is your chance to grow. And so I want to be part of that growth. And even if your goal is not to become a researcher, you're still, as we've seen in this class, there are so many ways that you can use this skill of designing an empirical research study that will set you apart from other people and make you a more effective problem solver. And you may never write another lit review after this. But even if you don't, it will still help you to be a better researcher and a better consumer of information and a better presenter of that information. And then some of you are going to end up in grad school. And I promise you this, because I get time and time again stories from students telling me this. Your professors will be so impressed with you if you come already having written even just a small lit review, because you're going to be way ahead of the game. So you can put all that in the bank, embrace the struggle, and believe me, it's a struggle for me too. Come and see me, call me, email me. I'm here for you. I'm here to help you. Help each other, peer review each other's work. No one is in this alone. And at the same time, no one can do this work but you. So having said that, I look forward to reading your review, and I will see you in class or on the discussion boards.